In this video, I'll show you how I paint a baby's portrait using watercolors. Watercolor is a beautiful but challenging medium, and it's very different from colored pencils. I'll explain how I build soft skin tones and smooth transitions by layering step by step as I paint. The full real-time lesson is available inside the membership if you'd like to paint along with me from start to finish. If you're new to watercolors, you'll also find many basic video lessons to help you get started. Now let's start painting. For the first layer, I want to wet the whole face, and that way we have a bit more time to fill in the areas and then have the layers blend. So we want smooth transitions, and that's what we're going to do with water. You want enough water that it's flowing. I'm going to use my biggest brush. So I'm going to wet the whole thing, but then except the eyes. And while doing that, you can use enough water. Try not to scrub. You don't want the graphite layer to come off. And because you have used a lot of water for this first layer, you want to let it dry for a moment before you go in with the first layer of paint. And for the first layer of paint, I want to use the Quin-Burnt Scarlet, but it looks a bit too pink, so I want to mix it with the Raw Umber Violet. So I want a color in between this. And then I can let that dry, and then I can determine, okay, is it too pink or is it not pink enough? Then I can always add some more pink. So now while this is drying a bit, I'm going to mix the paint color we're going to use for the first skin tone. So that's going to be the Quin-Burnt Scarlet. You want to mix enough. And the Raw Umber Violet. And you want the first layer to be light, so enough water. So I'm looking at the color now, comparing it to the reference photo. I think this looks good. Now you want enough water to make it light so that it doesn't get too dark. So you can start putting it down on the darker areas, so like say the sides of the forehead, but then towards the middle, you're going to clean your brush again and then blend, because here you don't want any paint because it's lighter. And the same for these areas. And then here it's a bit darker, but the shadow I want to build up by adding more layers later on. Yeah, you don't want too much water. So I feel a bit nervous starting the first layer, but I'm trying to tell myself, okay, we're just going to do this. It's watercolors. Sometimes you have control, sometimes you don't. You just need to have it all blend, and you can control a bit with the brush. If you see that it's spreading out too much, quickly dry and then blend, okay? So let's do this. I'm going to start here, and then I'm looking at the darker areas. So here in between the eyes, picking up a bit more. So everywhere where it's a bit darker. Now I'm going to clean the brush, and yeah, I need a bit more, like that. Keep on looking back and forth at the reference photo where you see the lights. And I prefer this layer to be too light than too dark. Again, here the chin is a highlight, going over the mouth and the neck. Okay, now we can clean the brush and then lift where you need to. So I think that part is fine. Here we need to lift a bit. So look at your painting and see where because the paint, the first layer is wet, it can blend in the areas you don't want it. So that's where you're going to lift, and keep paying attention. Okay, so the paint layer is going to dry up really light, but that's what I prefer. Maybe here lift a bit. No, that's fine. It's light anyway. Yeah, you do see also some highlight here under the nose. Almost looks a bit wet. Yeah, the light is shining really bright on the picture, on the baby. Okay, what I'm going to do now is let this layer dry. Because it's starting to dry, I don't want to mess up the layer. Oh, I'm going to blend this. Paint hair there anyway. You want to be careful with the edges. A lot of things to think about, to pay attention to, but remember, you can watch many videos, you can get yourself ready, learn all you can about watercolors, but you will learn the most when you're going to do it yourself. You're going to practice it yourself. You and your brush, that's what you will, that's the only way to learn it yourself. You can watch me paint this, and then you think, okay, that looks like something I can do too. Okay, let's do this. And then you will need to practice yourself, especially with watercolors, because I can have some challenges and surprises. Maybe my layer had a bit more water than your layer, so then you have a different effect. And all of those challenges, all of those things what happen when you paint, that's when you start to learn. By doing it yourself, by practicing, by making mistakes, by having those challenges, and just keep on painting and learning from it. With colored pencil, you can put the layer down and you know that it stays where you put it. With watercolors, we can have surprises. But I also know that you can, if you know what you're doing, you can control the watercolor. Now that this is drying, actually, I can already add the inside of the eyes. So I'm using a smaller brush, and I'm going to add a layer of the shadow violet. That's the beautiful gray color. And I'm using size 3 here. I can use a bigger one actually, size 6. And with the iris, I also want to start with a lighter layer. You can see that the light is shining on the eyes as well. So be careful, don't go with your hand over the paint because it's still drying here. So you see that for the first layers, the bigger layers, you want to use enough water, but with the smaller layers, you can use smaller brushes, less water. I'm looking at the highlights. This one turned out too low. But I can always use the white marker later, or maybe the white ink, to add those final bright touches into the eye. I'm adding a bit more pigment and then going around the edges. The shadow violet is a beautiful purple kind of gray. And if it turns out too grayish purple, we can add a layer of the sepia. Maybe this is too light, then I can always go over it, but I want to keep that light that's shining on the iris. Try to follow the edge of your sketch. This iris should be a bit smaller. Okay, I'm going to leave this. Very beautiful eye color. I think I need a bit more brown later. Okay, now that this layer is dry, I'm going to wet the whole layer again, and then I can do the same, but now I'm going to focus on the midtones a bit more. Again, trying to go around the highlights. You don't want to scrub, you want to just gently, with a really light touch, add water. That's why it's easier to use a bigger brush. And then if you have a tip like this brush, because it has a great tip and then a very big belly. This is called a mop brush. And then I will, so this is the exact brand, but I will have the materials I use always under the video. And if you have any questions, you can always let me know. Okay, now for this layer, I'm going to let this dry just for a moment. I want to use a bit more raw umber violet. Not too much, I think that's fine. Enough water, maybe a bit more, and then just a bit more of the Quin Burnt Scarlet. Yeah, I think that's fine. And then for the cheek, I want to add pink. I don't want too much water. So if you have the paint wet, you have to add less water. If the paper is dry, you will need to add more water. Because the paper is wet, it will also help the paint flow onto your paper. So let's start here. And maybe the paint layer could be a bit darker, but again, I prefer to be more. I'm drying the brush here so that I can have this blend. I prefer to add another layer next, then the other way around. Going over the lips. I need a bit more paint, oops, quickly, because I want to add here. And then around the chin it got to, let's see, now I'm going to blend and focus on the highlights and lift here for the chin. Okay, yeah, quickly check everything before the layer starts to dry. You want to make sure that you lift where you need to and blend where you need to. So if you need to add a bit more paint, you can quickly do that now before the whole paint layer dries. Okay, I want to wet the corner here because the cloth is light. So I went a bit over the edge. That's where you can clean. And I'm checking here, shadow under the nose, that's fine. I didn't paint up to the eye here. So if you have an edge somewhere, you can try to, with a damp brush, quickly go over it before the layer is all dry. Like I'm doing now, I'm lifting a bit more because it started to flow. I want to keep this highlight here under the eye. So you can watch your layer drying, but you do want to be careful because at this stage, and you don't want to use water on your brush. Remember, if you use water now, at this stage, you're going to get that bloom effect. Adding water to a layer that's already drying, it's going to spread. Okay, I'm going to let this layer dry. And again, if you have a hard edge, you can't remove it now. Yeah, again, be careful, let it dry, and then you can go over with a damp brush maybe to soften that edge. That's also possible. But again, every challenge you have now, maybe you'll have different challenges than me. I can only show you what happens when I have a challenge and how I fix that. But if you have a challenge and you're not sure what to do, yeah, try your best, but then leave it and then continue and learn from it for one of the next paintings. I'm going to focus on smaller areas at a time now. So this is the mop brush size 12, and this is the regular round brush size 12. So I'm going to use this one now so that I can have enough water, but that I have a bit more control now. Again, working with the tip of the brush when you're going to go around any edges. So I think I'm going to start with the raw umber violet, the shadow color, and then see how that goes. And then eventually for the cheek, I will need more pink. So that's maybe where I will add a touch of the Quin Rose. That's a really bright pink color, but you need to just glaze a touch of it. So first the raw umber violet with enough water, because again, it's safer to add lighter layers. And now that the paper is dry, you want to make sure that you have enough water. So see how this looks, how this flows on my palette? You also want this amount of water. And then what I'm going to do is add an area, quickly clean blot onto the tissue paper to dry your brush a bit, not completely dry, but just damp, and then blend the edges. And because you're adding light layers, you have a bit more control. And even though this isn't the correct color yet, don't worry, we're going to layer and layer. See how you can blend the edges like this, and then take some clean water, because sometimes you can get an edge from the water that you're adding. So keep on blending and drying the brush and then blending. So watch it dry a bit, like here. You can see that it's starting to get an edge. I want that highlight there, so I'm lifting. Watch it dry just a bit, because sometimes you can still get an edge. Then you can blend. Now is the time to blend. And now you see that edge there from the paint. But now we're going to blend with a damp brush, and then here as well. And then if you clean the brush again, so if you see another edge and an edge from the water, clean the brush, dry it even more, and then also blend that. You just go step by step, layer by layer, smaller areas at a time, and then it shouldn't be too scary, right? It's going to go step by step, and multiple light layers. If you go too dark right away, then oops, that's a lot scarier, right? The tip of the nose, quite in shadow here, and blend. Here it's light, and I see that here on the cheeks it's getting more pink. So what I'm going to do is add pink to the shadow color here, like that. And let's just add a layer, and even though it's darker, I'm just going to start with one layer until here. Yeah, so even though it's further, you want that blend there. Paint lower, and then now with water, I'm going to blend it up, and here as well. And now it looks really pink, but we can add another layer. So now quickly with clean water, because I see an edge here and here. Okay, and then this looks a bit too dark now, but I need to darken some more areas. So I'm going to add the raw umber violet. You need enough water to have it all flow. Okay, let's see, not too high. You can always add some more later. So blend and lift here for the chin. Okay, and I'm going to add a bit more to the neck shadow color. And then where it's lighter, I'm going to lift. Let's see, here and here. Next, I want to work on the eyes, the nose, and the lips. And then we can come back to the skin and those shadow areas, because I'm thinking now it looks dark, but then if you have, especially if you finish the hair as well, if you have the darker eyes, then you can really look back. And I have this pink here, but I will need to add a bit more pink here. And if this dries and it turns out a bit too pink, I can add a light layer of the raw umber violet. So I'm also looking at the skin, and it's looking all quite pink in my painting. So I'm thinking maybe add a layer of the raw sienna. It's a bit more yellow-orange. See that? So I can also add a bit of the raw sienna over this layer, and then you will get less pink. I have the size brush 3, the smaller one. I want to use sepia and slowly darken the iris a bit, and also the edges, yeah, where the eyelashes will be, and the crease line. Let's blend the crease line up. That's where I see shadow. Here between the lash line and the crease line, it's quite light. See that? So keep that area, lift it. Sometimes you blend and then you see water, a water line. Let's soften this as well. Okay, now let's add some sepia to the iris. And then next I can darken with the shadow violet, the gray color. Okay, let's do the same on the other side. And then next I'm going to add light gray to the eyeball white. You see how that stands out now? Because the eyeball white isn't white. It's always somehow in the shadow because it's inside the eyes. Again, I prefer a few lighter layers than too dark right away. So take your time and try to enjoy the process. You need to go through a few ugly layers, especially with the skin, with the larger area. So that's why I like to focus on the smaller details now, like the eyes. So then you have something to look at. I think this is dry enough that I can add a light layer of the shadow violet. Or actually, it looks more blue. And the shadow violet is more like a warm gray color. Either a very light layer of the neutral tint or a very light layer of the Payne's gray. And the Payne's gray is more of a bluish. See that? Bluish gray. So really light layer. And again, it's better that it dries up too light because it will dry up a bit lighter. Then the other way around. And for this, for the right corner, can be a bit darker, a bit more. See how that immediately adds a touch to the eyes. And I'm going to use the neutral tint here, mix it with the sepia to darken this part for the lashes and the crease line. And blend. For the crease line you can blend up because there's a shadow above it. And here you can blend a bit around it. And let's use this to darken the iris. So around the eye, yeah, there is a bit shadow. You can add a bit of the neutral tint and sepia mix. And blend if you see a line forming, like I have. Okay. And the same for the other eye. So you see how I just slowly darken each layer. Crease line is a bit darker. Here this lash line, but it is wet, so maybe I'll need to wait for another layer. On the top part is a bit of a shadow, so maybe also add that here. I'm looking through the lashes. And then here I see more pink, Quin Rose and the raw umber violet. That's dark, so blend. So I think next I'm going to add the raw sienna. But first, before I let everything dry, I want to add a bit of that pink shadow color here. So wherever you want to add shadow color, add it a bit lower of where you want it so that you have room to blend with the damp brush. And then adding a bit more paint where it's not enough because the layer is wet. But you need to do this while the layer is wet. Make sure that I still have the chin. Okay. Make sure I still have the highlight here. And if you see any edges forming, quickly blend. So again, yeah, enough water. You will really need to have it flow. Maybe a bit more pigment. And also the more water you have, the easier it will be to blend. So blend here for the highlight. That's the important part. And then you can work your way down. Keep on adding water, a bit more pigment if you need to. Let's see until here. So blend this. Keep on looking back. See if you need to blend a bit more, a bit over the nose. Blend. Now check everything. Quickly look back if you have any hard edges. But if you used as much water as I did, then you should have light layers. I want to add a bit more shadow here on the jawline. And then of course on the neck, but also here on this side of the forehead. And maybe here between the eyes also just a bit. Those highlights, the midtones and the shadows, that will create a realistic portrait painting. So the exact color, like I said, if it's just a bit more pink or a bit more yellow, that's not going to be the main problem. The values are more important. Okay, I'm going to use a smaller brush. This is the size 6. And the nose wing needs a bit shadow. So pay attention to the shadows that you see, and then where do you see that it's lighter. So I'm going to go area at a time. The tip of the nose and the shadow part around the highlights. So I'm going to lift here where it's lighter and here on this nose wing a bit. Blend. Okay. Slowly, layer by layer, and the nose is quite light. Also seeing here this kind of like a shadow here that connects the nose. I want that. And then you see a line here, so now you can blend and blend here. The same color. And then you can add more pink if you need to, but just for the first layer. And for the highlight, this is a tricky one. Are you going to paint around the highlight? Or are you going to fill it all in and create the highlight with the white ink or the white marker? So that's something you want to think about. I'm going to fill in the top lip first, the inside of the mouth. We will need to darken that. Yeah, so I'm going to try to paint a bit around it, but then I will just use the, or maybe the white watercolor, we can also use that. Yeah, just like that. For the corners here, the shadow color. And then I see a shadow, so I'm taking this, the Umber Violet, with a bit of the neutral tint for the shadow below the lip, here for the chin. So slowly darken. Don't have to darken at once. You can just take it one step at a time. That also gives me a bit more control. That if we darken step by step, slowly. Let's see the neutral tint with the raw umber here. A bit more raw umber for the shadow here under the nose and on the tip. Dry the brush and blend just the lower part of the nostril. And here you also see a shadow on this side. Okay, now I need to blend this edge here, dry, and keep on checking. So maybe something blends into another area accidentally because you have it wet, so keep on checking. I want to have a bit more raw umber violet here for the nose wing, just the edge here. And let's blend that. So you see how I usually just use the tip of the brush to paint, blend. So the more you paint with a brush, the more you will get used to it, and the more you will be able to control your hand to carefully just use the tip of the brush and not to press too hard. And yeah, it's all about control. So with watercolors, it's about control of your paint and water, but it's also about control of the brush, because the brush tip, it's flexible. It's not like a pencil. So you will need to be careful with the pressure you use. And with pencils, I'm always used to drawing with light pressure. I always say light pressure. Don't press too hard on your pencil. With the brush, the same, just really light pressure. I'm adding a bit raw umber over the nostril. So I'm just using the tip here. Oh, and now because it's wet, it's spreading. So you can see where it spreads. Don't worry, dry the brush or clean it first, dry, and then blend. The inside of the mouth with the neutral tint, maybe a bit seep because it looks a bit brown. A bit darker, the inside of the mouth. So here from the corner, you can also use a smaller brush if you feel that you need to. I just paint with the tip of the brush here. Okay, and now let's use the raw umber and then darken this area here. And then have that blend in with each other, like that. Also a bit more for the top lip. Actually, the top lip is a bit more pink. Maybe next I can add more pink on the lower lip between the highlights, like this. I think I'm going to add umber violet here below the eye, above the eye, under the eyebrow with enough water. I also went over the eyebrow because underneath, if you look between the eyebrow hairs, let's see, this shadow is quite dark, so I'm going to blend this. And just a bit under the eyebrow is a kind of highlight. Some nice hard edges. Blend here, can be a bit darker, this wrinkle. Blend this a bit more. And actually up between the eyes here, let's just connect here and blend. Let's see the sepia with a mix of the neutral tints. So just start creating these strokes. Oh, yeah, it was still wet there. Okay, work on this one. It can even be a bit darker, a bit more neutral tint. So just these smaller strokes and blend a bit here. Okay, I'm going to leave that because it needs to dry a bit more before I mess up the layer. Here I'm blending a bit, and there's also maybe a bit here. Okay, I don't draw the whole lash yet, just like the main shape in the inside. Let's just add a first layer to the hair as well. So I'm going to use the bigger brush. So keep looking back at the reference photo. How far is the darker hair, and how far, or where do you see the skin tone? So you don't want to paint too far because you still see skin tone showing through. So that's where I'm going to add more of that when I add the shadow color here. Then I know that I can also add it here where the hair is thinner. Okay, and then here those flyaway hairs is something we can create later. So don't worry if it doesn't look finished yet. You don't want to work on the details too soon. You want to think about the bigger shapes and the bigger areas and the first layers first. You can look at the reference photo and squint your eyes. That's how you can remove detail a bit. And then, so that's the step that your painting is now. If you squint your eyes, the sharp detail isn't there yet. These are the first layers. I have the size 3 here. I think it's dry, yes. Let's just add the pink. Only the pink. Look how bright that is. Maybe mix it a bit with the raw umber violet here, or with the red maybe. Quinburnt scarlet. Like that looks a bit better. It looks a bit less scary to add than the bright pink. But I also don't want it too dark. And the thing you want to be careful with is that you don't get a hard edge. You don't want it to look like the baby is wearing lipstick. So now I'm blending over the edge. Also adding a bit more color here. Blend this. Don't want it too dark. So every color you add, just a light layer, just glaze it. And a bit of that pink here for the nose wing. And here, add a touch of color to the nose. Let's darken the eyes. This is the size 3 with the neutral tint. Mix of the sepia. The iris is darker. And so the edges, I went over the edges. And now let's blend it a bit, but I'm leaving the rest a bit lighter. So I want that glow on the eyes. And then we'll still need to fix the highlight. And let's darken the lash line a bit here. Blend if you need to, but keep the rest light. With the bigger brush, size 12, I think I'm going to add the raw umber violet shadow color. With enough water, you just want to glaze a bit. I think this side is dark enough already. So I'm also going to add a bit more here with enough water so you can feel if it flows or not. And remember, better too light than too dark. I'm going to add a bit here. And now we're going towards the highlight, so blend. That's the most important part, those transitions. So when you add a layer, always blend the edges because you want smooth transitions. That's the important part with portraits. I'm going to add Carbazole Violet. I want to see what that will do here for the shadow. And again, I'm just, even though it's a shadow, I'm just going to add a bit, a touch. See how bright this is? Here and here, I see a bit that shadow on the jaw. Maybe here, on the chin. Now let's blend this. Make sure that you have a smooth transition. Okay, I lifted a bit here because that's where the cheek is, just a bit lighter. I think this is fine. So now I have it less vibrant, less pink. I'm going to switch to a smaller brush, size 6, and add this shadow here. Maybe I can also add some of the purple. You see that? The shadow below the lip. Not too much water. Like that. And remember, the color is not the most important part. So I like to add a bit of an interesting color here. And let's see, blend here. Okay, so here it's a bit more pink. So the shadow is up until here, like that. I also feel like I can add a bit purple here. If you look at your reference photo, if you compare to the shadow color here, I see a shadow here. So I want to add this here as well. That. Blend and check. Maybe a bit touch of purple here. You can also add a color and then think, or look at it, critique and think, okay, is it too purple? I think it's fine. Here it's more pink on this side. Adding a bit of this pink. I need more here, like that. Follow the flow of the eye. Now that everything is dry, what you can do is check the values. You can squint your eyes, look at the reference photo and at your painting, and see if you're satisfied with the shadows. In my painting, I see that I can darken the shadow here on the forehead just a bit, and here on this side. I don't want to darken the rest, so I think the rest is pretty good. I don't want to darken it all too much because the values on the baby, the shadows aren't that dark. The darker parts are here on the neck, still need to darken that, and the hair. And I like that purple that I added to the shadow color. But for the shadow I add here, I'm going to use the raw umber violet. I don't want to get too purple, so I think I'm going to go over this area with the raw umber violet, just to have that purple showing through, but not too obvious. You just want a touch of that purple. So the round brush, size 12. So we're slowly getting there, step by step. Okay, so enough water, just a glaze of raw umber, not too much. You want enough water in the mix, you want just a light mix to glaze. Here a bit, and also here in between the, and now careful here with the highlight. So here in between the eyebrows, I'm trying to react quickly. Clean the brush, go over the highlights. You don't want to mess that up. Then this, I'm going to continue here before this part dries, just like this, and blend. So here this part is just a bit lighter here. You can see that in the reference photo. So make sure that you lift here and blend. So watch it dry a bit. And maybe I want to add more pink, yeah. Because I'm looking at this where I added the raw umber. The raw umber violet is a mix of the raw umber and the quin rose, the pink. So I use the raw umber violet, but if it's not pink enough, I just add a touch of the quin rose. So if you don't have raw umber violet, you can also make the mix yourself. You just mix raw umber with the quin rose. I don't want to have to rely on mixing too much. So that's why I already have my colors picked out. But we went over that in all of the first lessons when I went over which colors we're going to use. Let's see. I'm also going to add just a bit here. Okay, let's blend this. I really want that roundness. I want to create this roundness of the cheek. Remember, it's wet here, but I'm not going to paint up until there. So I'm stopping here. Blend. Make sure that your brush is pretty damp when you blend. You don't want to go back in with too much water because the layer is already drying. So when I dab, I usually do it a few times. You see me going over it a few times maybe, or I really press down. Here I want to add a touch of pink with the raw umber violet. The shadow color can be a bit darker and a bit more color on the lip here. Oh, and then the shadow below the lip. I need to darken that as well. And maybe a bit of the raw umber violet with a bit more water just to glaze here for that cheek. I really want that roundness in the cheek. Maybe I should have used a bigger brush. Challenging to blend with the smaller brush. With the size 10 round brush and the sepia and the neutral tint, because the sepia on its own is too light, too brown. So be careful here that you don't fill it all in, because there are quite a few areas where you can see the skin showing through. Not too dark right away, just build up the layers. Just use the tip with a really light touch, those really small hair strokes. And this is all about control over your brush. If you need more practice, take an extra piece of paper and practice this. The more you practice your hand, the better control you will get. Here it's lighter, so I'm going to use more sepia there. I have the more neutral tint now, so I'm going to add these first. So look at the direction. I see that it's going down here, and a few are going here this way. Okay, now let's work on the lashes. The same neutral tint, and yeah, bit of the sepia, but more neutral tint. Okay, so the top one is darker, so I'm going to start with that one. And I'm going from thin to thick. That some of them overlap, so they're really soft, natural lashes. That's the tricky part. The lower, maybe even remove a bit of the paint more. The lashes are really light here. So keep some of them darker and some of them lighter. So I used more sepia so that it's not too dark. I prefer to darken a few later. It's challenging, but try to keep the paint light that you are using here. Very natural, light lashes. And then let's see, a few here overlapping. I don't paint the lashes up until the iris, but until the lash line. There's a bit in between the lash line and the iris. Let's use a bit more neutral tint and then darken the iris, top part of the iris here. I want the eyes to pop. The pupil, part of the pupil you see here, and on the other side, the top part is darker. I want to use the sepia with a touch of neutral tint here. And let's blend this. Careful. That area is a bit darker. Now you also blend the lashes like this a bit. That's what I want. And here as well. So more sepia. Clean the brush and gently blend between the lashes. So don't scrub the whole thing, but gently control, like that. Okay, now the crease line is a bit darker. You can also blend a bit over the eyebrow to blend the hairs a bit, because the hairs are really natural. You don't want these sharp lines, so I like to blend a bit over. Try to follow the direction that you see. It's not all straight, a bit curvy here. Some hairs overlap. So you see how I'm slowly working in layers. I'm actually just going to add, no, I'm going to do that with the thinner brush. Let's see, the raw umber violet, but that's not dark enough, so touch of the neutral tint. And the shadow, you're also going to create this in layers. So blend now and then darken on the next layer. I'm just going to blend a bit here for the jawline. You don't want like a harsh line. Okay, now I think time to let this dry. If you add too much detail on the clothing, then you will also put the focus on the clothing. Okay, so that's something you want to keep in mind. Less details on the clothing. That will keep the focus on the face. With the size 6, what I'm going to do is add a few smaller hairs here, or a thin hairline. And then just like with the eyebrow, I'm going to later, once that's dry, glaze over it with the skin tone color, again to make those hairs look soft and natural. So with the neutral tint and the sepia, first here to darken a bit more. And then I think with the switch to a smaller brush. Remember to look at the direction. See this curl here. Okay, let's darken here a bit more. So now I'm going to focus on those thinner, smaller hair strokes. Try to draw them a bit like messy. So here there's some on the forehead. Dry the brush so that you don't have too much water. So just with the tip of the brush, you just need to keep in mind that you use really light pressure. Just to use the tip, because if you use more pressure, then you start to paint with the belly, and the belly is thicker. So keep on looking back at the reference photo to see, you don't have to paint it all exactly the same, but just like see here is like a curve, here it curls this way. With this size 8, I'm going to add another layer with the neutral tint, just the neutral tint, yeah, but with enough water and just a bit here. I'm going to use this. You can also use the dip pen and the ink, but this works well for these areas. Let's see. Here it's dry, so I can carefully place my hand. Look at the shape you see of the highlight in the eye, because while I was painting, I lost a bit of that shape. So now I'm going to bring that back a bit. And then I also see a highlight here and here and here. Let's see, really thin, just that edge of the lash line, like that. With the size 8, I'm just going to add a light glaze. So the Quin Burnt Scarlet with the Raw Umber Violet, and I also had a bit of the Quin Rose. Let's see, yeah. And then enough water. Let's start here and blend. Okay, let's quickly blend so that you don't get any lines. This is starting to get messy, so I need to be quick. I added a bit more paint and blend here. I'm going to use the white with the size 1. Let's see, the titanium white. I'm going to try to add those highlights. Just a few, and then you can go over this. See a few highlights with the sepia, yeah, and the neutral tint, of course. So go a bit around those highlights, a few with the neutral tint, like these really darker. So look at the darker areas now, the darker strokes. Okay, I'm going to blend this a bit. I think that it stands out too much. Okay. I'm going to use the round brush, size 12. And what I'm going to do is work wet on wet. I'm going to use the lightest cream color I have, that's above titanium. And then for those grayish, bluish areas, I think I'm going to drop some shadow violet, maybe a bit of the cerulean blue. So let's just see how that goes. I'm going to wet the whole cloth first. And to add a bit of the above titanium, just to add a touch of color, so that it's not all bright white. And this color is warm. And now I'm going to take the shadow violet and add it here. Because you're working wet on wet, you can just drop in the colors. And again, you can just, yeah, create something. It doesn't have to be exactly the same. Maybe a bit of the blue, just to add some color, the gray. And maybe a bit of this darker color here for the edges, the folds, maybe here. And then here, the darker areas. This is going to be the shadow bit. Okay, now I'm going to have it all, dry, just here at this top part. I'm going to go over these hairs, just to make it all look a bit more blended. See how that turns out. And then blend the edge, and then use enough water here. Try not to scrub, but just go over it and follow the direction of the hair. I'm just glazing it a bit over it, trying to make it look more soft and natural. I'm going to use the size 6, not too big. This is not completely dry, but almost dry. I'm just going to use the neutral tint and then darken this so that I really have like an edge from the cloth and the neck. And blend this like that. Maybe darken here a bit. I'm thinking, should I darken here a bit more or just keep that all lighter? Yeah, I'm just going to keep this area lighter. I like that grayish blue. Yeah, do I need just a bit? You do want an edge because it is a shadow here. Okay, I'm blending this a bit so that I don't have a dark line. Here I want it a bit darker, so I think I'm leaving it like this. So once it's dry completely, it's time to remove the tape. You can do that carefully. So this is my end result. I hope you are satisfied with what you created. And I also hope that you learned a lot. If this is your first portrait painting with watercolors, remember it's all about practice and all about getting used to the medium watercolors. So I remember how I felt when I started this portrait. I felt a bit nervous. So if you're the same, or if you also felt a bit nervous, look at what you created now. And you can only grow from here. So the more you start to paint and the more you start to practice, you will improve. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this video inspired you and helped you learn some new techniques. If you'd like to follow the full painting process or start learning the basics of watercolors, it's all available inside the membership. Feel free to leave a comment if this was helpful or if you'd like to see more portrait tutorials like this. And I'll see you in the next video.